Hi everyone! Alright, this is the video to begin chapter 3. So if you are in need of doing chapter 1 or chapter 2 first, please pause this video, go back, find the correct video that you need, and then you can come back to join me for chapter 3. If you don't have your book, please go get it so that you can follow along as I read, and that way you're able to see the pictures as well. Chapter 3. We're starting on page 21. Maggie began to enjoy cursive time. She experimented with letters, leaning over backward, and decorated with little circles the way her mother dotted her I's. She wrote messy G's with long straight tails the way her father made his Y's. "Why, Maggie," said Mrs. Leeper, "I find your cursive very untidy." Is she happy with her? No. "I'm writing like a grown-up," Maggie explained. The result was Mrs. Leeper's asking Maggie's mother to come to school for a conference. So, already we kind of know that Maggie is not listening. Sorry, I'm just going to move my laptop that is propped up a little bit over. There we go. So we already know that her teacher is not happy with her. She is not following directions in class, and it sounds like she's also not talking very nicely maybe to her teacher. She might be being a little sassy. That day, Mrs. Schultz had to fill the gas tank of the car, go to the bank, buy paper for the computer, and take Kisser to the veterinarian for his shot. All this after teaching exercise classes in the morning. She was not smiling when she reached school, still wearing her warm-up suit. So her warm-up suit is just her gym, her exercise clothes. And just kind of stop and think about what you know about your own life, right? And what you know about your parents. And if I were to call them and say that you weren't listening in class and that I needed to have a conference with them and I needed them to come in and talk to me, just kind of think about how they would feel about that. And I don't always love it when Lucas's teachers email me and tell me that he wasn't doing something right. She handed Kisser's leash to Maggie so she could take care of him during her conference with Mrs. Leeper. Kisser was so happy to see a playground full of children that he wanted to jump on everyone. Belle does that too. Maggie had to hold on to his leash with both hands when her friends gathered around to ask why Mrs. Schultz was talking to the teacher. Joanne answered for Maggie. Maybe Mrs. Leeper wants her to be room mother or something, right? We have room parents. So here we see Maggie, and we see Kisser, and we see her friends, and we can see that she's holding on to his leash, but that he's trying to jump up on the other kids. "I bet," said Kirby on his way to the bus. "What did she say?" demanded Maggie when her mother returned and everyone had boarded buses. "What did Mrs. Leeper say about me?" "Down, Kisser." Mrs. Schultz sounded cross. We know cross from when we read The Magic Finger, and we talked about how she was feeling cross, which meant angry or grumpy about something. So if we know that Mrs. Schultz is feeling grumpy or cross, we're going to guess that probably Mrs. Leeper was not saying good things about Maggie in class. "Mrs. Leeper said you are a reluctant cursive writer who has not reached cursive writing readiness, and perhaps you are too immature to write it." Maggie was indignant. "I am not," she said. "I am gifted and talented." Some people were gifted and talented, and some people weren't. At least, that was what teachers thought. Maybe no one had told Mrs. Leeper how gifted and talented she was. Maggie's mother drove home without saying one single word. Another clue that she's probably not very happy. Maggie hugged Kisser, who was so grateful that he licked her face, which she found comforting. Someone loved her. For several days, just for fun, Maggie drew fancy letters at cursive time. And then Mrs. Leeper told her that Mr. Galloway, the principal, wanted to see her in his office. On her way, Maggie, filled with dread, which means she's really starting to get worried, dawdled along as she felt she could get away with it. So she's dawdling, which means that basically she's wasting time. Maybe she stopped to get a drink. Maybe she stopped to tie her shoes, but she's not going quickly. "Hello there, Maggie," said Mr. Galloway. "Sit down and let's have a little talk." Maggie sat. She never enjoyed when grown-ups called it a little talk, right? And just like if I say that we need to have a little talk, a lot of times I'm feeling upset about something that you might have done or said maybe to a friend or to another teacher, or the way that you acted at recess, right? Just like I'm sure when you're at home, if your parents say they need to have a little talk with you, it may not always be good. Mr. Galloway smiled, leaned back in his chair, and placed his fingertips together like an A with his thumbs for the crossbar. A printed A, of course. "Maggie, Mrs. Leeper tells me you are not writing cursive. Can you tell me why?" Maggie swung her legs, stared at a picture of George Washington on the wall, nibbled a hangnail. Mr. Galloway waited. Finally, Maggie had to say something. "I don't want to." I see." Mr. Galloway spoke as if Maggie had said something very important that required serious thought, lots of it. "And why don't you want to?" asked the principal after a long silence, during which Maggie studied the way he combed his hair over his bald spot. "I just don't want to," said Maggie. "I use a computer." Mr. Galloway nodded as if he understood. "That's all, Maggie," he said. "Thank you for coming in." That evening, Mrs. Leeper telephoned Maggie's mother to say that the principal had reported Maggie was not motivated to write cursive. "That means you don't want to," Mrs. Schultz explained to Maggie. So the principal didn't yell at her, right? He was trying to find out more information, but I don't think he's super happy with her either, right? Because she's not doing what she's supposed to be doing. So here we see Maggie. She's nervous, right? She's chewing on her fingers, and she was swinging her legs, which tells us that the message that her body's sending us, right, is that she is not feeling comfortable, and maybe she's worried about being in the principal's office. Here we see the picture of George Washington that's hanging on the wall, and then here we see the principal with his hands, right, like an A, in front of his face, taking what she says very seriously, right? He's listening to her and not yelling, just trying to find out what's going on. "That's what I told him," said Maggie, who couldn't see what all the fuss was about. "Maggie," cried her mother, "what are we going to do with you?" "I'll motivate you, young lady," said Mr. Schultz. "No more computer for you. You stay strictly away from it." So, if she's not going to listen in class, he's taken away the computer, which she really likes. I know a lot of you guys like the computer too. Mrs. Schultz had more to say. "Tomorrow, Maggie is to see the school psychologist." So, the school psychologist is kind of like a grown-up like Mrs. Abate, who's our guidance counselor. She looked worried. Mr. Schultz looked grim, and Maggie was frightened. A psychologist sounded scary. Kisser understood. He licked Maggie's hand to make her feel better. So if we think about it, right, if she's having maybe some negative feelings about something that she's supposed to be learning, that can happen to you guys too, right? So if I notice that you're feeling really upset, or you're feeling, maybe I can think that you're feeling worried if I see you chewing on your fingers or not wanting to participate, then I might think that something's wrong and ask Mrs. Abate for help too. So I don't think that Mrs. Abate is scary, and hopefully you don't either. So, she's not in trouble by having to go to the school psychologist. But her mom is just hoping maybe if she can talk to someone else, that maybe she can figure out her feelings about this cursive that seems to be bothering her so much. As it turned out, Maggie loved the psychologist, just like a lot of you love Mrs. Abate, who talked in a quiet voice and let her play with some toys, while he asked gentle questions about her family, her dog, her teachers, nothing important. He asked about her times tables, and almost as an afterthought, he inquired, how do you like cursive writing?" "Okay," answered Maggie, because he was a grown-up. A couple days later, Maggie's mother said, "The school psychologist wrote us a letter." Maggie's feelings were hurt. He had seemed like such a nice man. She had learned to be suspicious of letters from school. This was not the first. So she's thinking that the letter is something bad, but sometimes I write letters when good things happen, so let's see. Mrs. Schultz continued, "He says it will be interesting to see how long it will take you to decide to write cursive." "Oh," said Maggie. "How long do you think that will be?" asked Mrs. Schultz. "Maybe forever," said Maggie, beginning to wish she had never started the whole thing. So that's the end of chapter 3. And right now we're seeing that Maggie is not having fun with cursive, but instead of maybe just saying, okay, I'll try it, she's now feeling kind of stubborn that she started to kind of take a stand against it, and now she's kind of stuck in a hard place because she wants to go back and maybe try it. It seems like at the end of chapter 3, but she's just feeling too stubborn and kind of wishing that maybe she had made a better choice. So if you think about it now, she's had to talk to her teacher. She's had to talk to the school psychologist. She's had to talk to the principal. Her mom had to go in for a conference. And now there's all of this craziness over something so simple like learning how to write her letters. So maybe as you're, filling out your vocabulary and your questions for chapter 3, stop to think about, is there anything that you've ever been stubborn about that maybe you wish you hadn't been so stubborn? Maybe it didn't really matter that much. And kind of think about what might have happened if you had done it differently, right? So maybe if your parents asked you to empty the dishwasher and you said no and you didn't want to do it and you started yelling, right? And then maybe your parents said, okay, well, then you're losing your phone and you're going to go up to bed early and you're not going to have ice cream with the rest of the family because you're not doing your chores and being responsible. And then you're upstairs and you're laying there and you don't have your device and you're really wishing you were having ice cream for dessert. And maybe you start to think, oh, I should have just emptied that dishwasher, right? So that's, I think, kind of where Maggie's feeling right now, is that she's wishing, oh man, I wish I had just done my cursive, because now all of these things are happening and no one seems very happy with me because I wasn't listening to my teacher. And she's starting to think about, I wonder what's going to happen next, right? So, you might want to start thinking about it. What do you think's going to happen next? Do you think that it's going to take her a week to start doing cursive? Do you think she'll try it tomorrow? Do you think it's going to take her a month or a year? So start making your predictions about chapter 4. Once you're ready, you can start the next video for chapter 4. And please make sure at this point that your packet is done all the way up through chapter 3. So I hope you guys are having a wonderful day, and I will see you later. Bye.